Hi, I'm Mary Poplin with Boris FX, and we're going to be going over office hours today. And one of the things I'm going to show you today is how to handle tracking facial animation onto a stop motion puppet. And we actually got this footage from a user, and I'm going to show you where. Let me switch views here. All right, so we got this stop motion footage from Cajun Catastrophe, and I'll show you what that looks like. So, Cajun Catastrophe, excuse me, Cajun Catastrophe is a YouTube channel, and they create a lot of different crafts, but also have a heavy focus on stop motion. And what they do is they track these animated faces onto stop motion dolls. So let's go ahead and minimize this. Okay, so here's our shot. And let's talk about how we handled this. There we go. So this is the footage I got. Now, this footage is a test, so don't get too wrapped up in how it looks. This is the user trying to figure out what is the best way to compose the face and what is the best way to build the armature. So again, this is an unfinished doll, but they sent this to us and they said they were having trouble getting the face to track. And I'll show you exactly what they were running into. All right, let's go over to our footage, select it. We're going to be working inside of After Effects for this because that's what the user is working in. If we have any Nuke users out there in the audience who want to see stuff in Nuke, please send me some footage that's giving you trouble. We'll dive into Nuke and we'll break it down. So whatever y'all want to do. This is all about interactive feedback. Okay, so let's take Mocha and apply it. So let's select our footage. Let's go to Effect. Let's go to Boris FX Mocha and Mocha Pro. And we're going to do this from scratch. All right. Now, inside of my footage here, we're just going to launch this. And Mocha will read this directly from my timeline because I'm using the plugin. If I were using the standalone, I would have to go to File, New, and create a whole new file. What we're doing is we're reading right off our timeline. Now, we're going to go ahead and start tracking this. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to take my little solid shape here, and I'm going to just draw a little circle right around our character's face. We're going to zoom in. And we're probably going to use our auto or quick stabilize tool so that we keep our track in the middle of the screen. I want to turn my surface tool on, and we're going to track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Okay, we probably don't need to track more than 50% of the pixels used because in general, Mocha's pretty good about the default. Now, if I found I was slipping, I could crank this number up. But this footage is 4K footage, so we're probably going to be fine. Let's go ahead and hit track forwards. You can see that we're tracking large motion. Now, if we were tracking actual stop motion frames, one of the things that you'll notice in animation is it tends to be on twos, right? This is where instead of doing 24 frames per second, it's 12 frames per second, except for each frame is doubled. So you end up with 24 frames per second, but both of those frames, so you get like 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, etc., all the way up to 12. Now, sometimes that can throw the tracker off. So if you find that the motion is moving too rapidly for Mocha to track, you can always come over here to your search area, and you can increase your search area, which means Mocha will look further in your shot in order to try to track your object. So always keep in mind that you have a search area here that you can change. You can also change the angle and zoom percentage, okay? And that can really be helpful because the algorithm is looking for a pattern of pixels, and it tracks that pattern of pixels as it moves through the scene. In order to save processing time, we tend to default to about 640 by 360 pixels as a search range. So if you have an object that's moving rapidly through the scene, you're going to want to increase that because otherwise it won't be in the search frame for the tracking algorithm. And that's important. All right, so you can see that we're tracking this, and you can see that it's holding on pretty good. Now, I did discuss with the user a couple of things that I would do to make this model a little easier to track for planar tracking. So you'll notice this model is perfectly round, right? The face is perfectly round. And we're a planar tracker. So we'll track one plane at a time really well. But if you track, for instance, the intersection of multiple planes at once, it might not give you the most rock solid track in the world. So if you look at a face, I'm going to switch to my view here for a second so I can show you something. Okay, so on my face, in general, people tend to think of heads as round. They're not, though. I have a front plane to my face right here. I have a side plane to my face right here. And they connect at just about 90-degree angles. Just about. It's really a little bit wider than that. But, of course, there's not a hard corner down the side of my face, but there is a soft corner. When you're tracking a sphere, you're basically tracking the intersection of a corner, basically 4 planes at once. You're not always going to get good results for that. So, I did suggest to the user that they maybe flatten out the front plane of the face a little bit, make it more realistic to a human-style head. That being said, you can track a sphere. You're just going to have to do some hand animation over the top to match that warp. And I'll show you how to do that as well in these office hours. So we're going to let this track. And once our track is complete, I'm going to show you how to apply the data. Now, I'm a big fan of using the insert module, but you can also use corner pins for this. It really doesn't matter. You can also do this track inside of the free version of Mocha that comes with After Effects. That's Mocha AE, and you can find that under Effects, Boris FX Mocha, and it's Mocha AE. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're either using Mocha Pro or Mocha AE inside of After Effects to follow along with what we're doing here. So this is still going to take a little bit longer to track because these are live and we're tracking in real time. So you can see that the surface tool is not 100% glued to the front plane of the face. There's a reason for that. The reason is it's a sphere. Okay. So as I said before, a flatter plane would have a little bit easier time to track to. I also suggested that the user either put closed eyes on the model and maybe a dot or a dash for the mouth. And that way, when you put the animated eyes and nose and mouth over the top, you're going to end up with something that's a little bit easier to deal with, a little easier to cover so that you don't have to do paint work too. So the nice thing about getting away with having closed eyes on your model is that can always be your default, okay? And then your open eyes and your narrowing eyes and all of that can be animated over the top without a lot of weird looking artifacts. So keep that in mind when you're building out these kinds of models and doing your own tests. All right, so I've got a pretty decent track on that. Let's turn this auto stabilize off or quick stabilize. Okay, and you can see that this is sticking pretty good on the head based on the type of motion that's happening here. Now, we could do something like a adjust track on this, where maybe I could try to find, you know, the inside corner of this eye and like the outside corners of the mouth and do a correction based on that. And I'll show you how to do that if you want. Hi, Joel. Do y'all want to see how to do an adjust track? If not, I'm going to assume the answer is yes. and we'll just dive into it. All right, I'm going to assume yes. So let's go over to Adjust Track. So you see in Adjust Track, we have Classic and we have Transform. I'm going to use Transform. It's our new Adjust Track module. Well, I say new, but it's not really new. It's been around for a year. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a 4-corner perspective adjust track, which means we're going to add 4 new points. So let me find something I can find again on this model, like this little dot here, and this little texture anomaly here. Same thing for the corner of the mouth. All right, so now these 4 points, I'm going to say, hey, select these points. We want to set these as a reference frame. Okay, so this is going to be my reference frame. And now what we can do is we can move through this and we can try to correct back to our points. So if you look here on our reference frame and our current frame, we have a little bit of drift. So let's correct that. I can either tell Mocha to auto-correct it, but it might not be able to because of the change. So instead, we're just going to move it manually right back to here. See, auto doesn't quite get it. But I'm an artist, and I know where the point's supposed to be. Again, we're going to correct to here. And I can also nudge, just like this, to make sure that it matches my reference frame. And again, we're going to correct to here and here. All right, let's make sure we find the exact place. All right, and so now we should have a little bit better track. Now, and you can see I start to lose it again right around here. So let's correct that. Let's correct our shape. Well, it's not our shape. Let's correct our points. All right. And again, correct to here. And we'll nudge it and correct to here. All right. So we're getting a better track for our eyes here, but we always want to pay attention to where it's falling off. So again, correct and correct, nudge it to make it look right, and then correct and correct. And we're just going to look for areas where it's the most off. And the mouth is definitely throwing us off the most, okay? But again, that's because this is a sphere and we are a planar tracker. All right, so we're trying to make something match where it doesn't necessarily match. All right. So I'm not going to go through too much and do too many keyframes, but I do kind of want to show you that workflow. So let's play that and see how that looks. We're starting to really lose it here. And let's correct that over time. Here we are. Correction and correction. And it's always a little bit unnerving when you're doing these corrections because you can see the surface tool really warp in a way that's unexpected until you get that last corner into place. Okay, so that's just something to think about. Like just, okay, so that's way better. All right, and we're still starting to lose it here at the end. So let's find out where the most drift is coming from, about here. And the principles of animation apply. So you want to make sure that you're animating on the areas of most difference, okay? And let's just bring that here. And we'll bring that there. That's, pretty close. Let's go here. Okay. And so now, yeah, let's delete this last keyframe. I don't like what it's doing. Yeah, that's better. Okay. If you ever don't like a keyframe, you just go right over here and delete, and it will delete all 4 of those point keyframes. And whenever you make a keyframe in Adjust Track, it's always making 4 new keyframes. So keep that in mind as well. All right. So now let's go back to our track tab and let's check that out. Nicer. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this and close it. Okay. And then I'm going to save my After Effects file. And the reason I do that is because the plugin is actually not really saved until your host file is saved. And I tell people this because I've had users get upset because some of the settings haven't been saved because they've left their host open and they haven't saved for like, I think the longest I heard one user doing that for was like 72 hours. And they were like, I lost 72 hours of work. Like, ooh, set up autosave, please. So make sure that you're saving often so that if After Effects crashes, which happens with literally all software, make sure that you have a backup, okay? Now, we have these little eyes here, and this has already been animated according to whatever the character is saying, okay? But the user had a problem when they were trying to apply this, and here's what the problem was. We're just going to duplicate this real quick, bring it above the top, and I'll show you a couple of things. Okay, let's take our Mocha and launch it. And now this insert is the same size, technically, as the 4K footage. So when we go to our track, we say export track data, and I'll do an AECC power pin, copy to the clipboard, save, and close, and go back over here. What we end up with when I go to, let's select my eyes here, and let's go on our first frame. We want to make sure we're in the first frame, and we go to edit, paste. Okay. Now, this was the problem they were running into. It's just not aligning. That's very odd. Why isn't it aligning? Well, because it's not set up right. Okay. What we have is we have this face that's meant to go on our face. And of course, it's not the same aspect ratio. It's not scaled to the right size or any of that. So what I like to do, let's undo our paste keyframes. Okay. What I like to do is go into Mocha, go into Module Renders, Insert Layer. We're going to select Test 2, okay? And we're going to make that our insert layer. This can be a pre-comp. This can be anything animated. This can have effects on it. Doesn't matter. Whatever is our insert layer, as long as it is encapsulated. Like if I had effects on this, I would want to go to layer and I would want to go to pre-compose and I would want to move all attributes into the new composition and I would want to adjust the composition duration to the time span. Okay, that's always what you want to do in After Effects when you're blending effects together because it envelopes everything and you don't have to worry about going back and forth. And also, notice that my shot starts in the first frame and ends on the last frame. That's important, okay? Because if you have something that goes off screen to the left, Mocha's going to read the keyframes of the entire bit of footage. So when you go to paste your data in, it will be offset by however many frames are in that big wide keyframe range. So if you are doing things like working in Premiere and exporting to an After Effects file, pre-compose everything before you even start tracking on it. Pre-compose everything into its own neat little shot, okay? Move all attributes into the new composition and adjust the the composition duration to the timeline. And then I actually recommend that you pre-compose it again, and that's your encapsulated shot. So you would use your pre-composed footage as your Mocha base, and then anything else you put on top of it would be encapsulated in your pre-composition. Really important to do when you're working in After Effects. Okay, so in this case, we don't need it because everything starts on frame 1. Okay, we're going to jump over here to our movie, and we are going to launch Mocha Pro. And it'll take it a second. There we are. All right. Now, let's turn our insert clip to insert layer. And now you can see I have my eyes and my nose. Okay. So let's make the eyes as wide as they should be and start putting the mouth where it should be. We might need to zoom out a little bit. All right. Just like this. All right, and of course, you'll have to do this to your tastes depending on your setup. All right, so now that's my eyes and nose and mouth aligned. All right, but once again, I have the problem of trying to slap a flat plane onto a curved surface. Okay, so how do I deal with that? Well, if you were watching last week, we talked a little bit about the insert module. We talked a little bit about the grid warp tool. So let's take this to like, maybe level 2. Yeah, level 2. Okay, so let's just round this out a little bit. Let's take the eyes, curve them a little bit, and scoot this mouth up a little bit. Sort of arrange it so that it's kind of in the right space. If we need to, we can widen it again. There we go. So we want this more or less feeling like it's wrapped onto the face. And that's going to be our original starting point. And so now what we do is we can come in here. We can try to curve this back into place. So you see what we're doing here? We're pulling this around the sphere of the face. And it animates between those two keyframes. So once again, you can come over here and do the same thing. And these keyframe whenever you touch them. Just like this. So really quickly, you end up with what you see is what you get sort of insert for your eyes, nose, and mouth. Now, of course, your mileage is going to vary. So when I say that I would set this up a little bit differently, what does that mean? Well, I'd kind of like to show you. Let's go ahead and save this really quick. Let's go to our remove module for a second. And I'm going to just take a screenshot of this. Let's hit create. We're just going to create a clean plate. And I'm going to save it to my desktop, which I don't recommend you do, but I'm going to delete it right after this demo, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's go over to File and Open. And let's find our clean plate. And I want to talk about what I would set this up as if I were doing this test and I were making these models. I do sculpt a little bit. So let me make some suggestions here. Okay, so first, let's see what Photoshop will get me here. Let's go to Edit and Fill. And let's do content aware fill and see what it gets me. It's not great. Let's do this a little bit. All right, let's go to where's our heal tool? Heal brush 2. Okay, and let's just heal that a little bit. Make it look like something. Okay, Control deselect. All right. We're just gonna make this texture here a little bit, and then we're gonna heal this mouth over. Okay, so if I were gonna do this model, what I would do is I would make the eyes closed like this, like I was mentioning. Okay, maybe we'll do a multiply. There we go. Okay, so I'd do the eyes like this, and I'd either do a little dot for the mouth here or a dash. Something like that. Something that looks at rest, so that whenever you're putting your animation over the top, you've got something to work with. Okay. Now, the other thing that I would do is I would make this face a little more plain-like. So what does that mean? Let's take a little lasso tool here. And then let's go to Edit, Transform. Let's do a little bit of perspective. And then Control T. Okay. And what I mean is, hi there. What I mean is, I would make this face a little more flat. So you'd end up with something like this. And you could still, have that nice roundness to the eyes. Like you could still have some shading here, some pushback. Okay. So you could still have those shapes and they would feel nice, but you just want to be a little bit thoughtful about how the planar track works and then what you can do to make your effects pipeline a little bit easier. Now, if you have to have like a football shaped head or a ball shaped head because the design absolutely requires it, you're just going to have to do hand animation to get around that. But if you're designing from scratch, that's something to think about. All right. I see that we have Cajun Catastrophe in our little audience. That's the word. I apparently forgot the word for audience. If you're just joining us, this is Office Hours with Boris FX. I'm Mary Poplin. We're going over shots basically in real time and answering questions that users have had. So last week, we talked a little bit about page turns. We also still talked about hand animation for corrections. This week, we're talking a little bit about stop motion and how we would handle this shot. Now, another thing that was a problem with this shot that I kind of want to talk about for a second is when some of the users who are trying to work on this shot, oh, very good. I'm glad the flattened face worked better. Okay, but when the users were first working on this shot, I think that they did the align surface trick, which is great. Align surface is great, but when you align your surface like this and you have a whole lot of perspective motion happening, do you see how my surface is disappearing? Like it's just going away. Okay, so what happened there is that my surface tool is going behind the camera. So if you've ever been tracking in Mocha and you've had your surface tool completely meat cake on itself and the shape meat cake on itself, that is exactly what's happening. So if we tried to export this, so if we go to our track, we say export our track data, After Effects, Power Pen, copy to clipboard, save, and close. Let's go back over to After Effects and not my weird doll painting. Puppet painting, excuse me. It's puppet, it's not a doll. I actually do make dolls. Anyway, if we come over here and we go to edit, paste, yeah, we get a total disaster. Okay. So it just doesn't line up. The data disappears. It's no fun at all. All right. So the way I recommend doing this is you can either export the corner pin and use the surface tool to fit everything to the face nicely using the insert layer as your, basically your guide. You can then export that corner pin, which is much smaller, into After Effects. But because we're dealing with a curved surface here, I, in general, recommend that we go to, let's go back to Mocha real quick. And I see that Cajun Catastrophe is saying that they did a second version with a more flattened face, and the tracking data worked very well. And I believe it. Yeah, that's a pretty solid thing to do. Okay, so let's go back to our surface tool, turn it on. Okay, and now let's actually put it back where it goes. Right back onto the face. Here we are. Just like this. And this won't have affected my grid warp tool, but now look, it stays exactly where it's supposed to stay. Huzzah. So now when we save and close, we can come right back over here and we can go to Insert Composite and Render. Turn our overlay off. So you end up with your face back over the top. Okay, so you either export the corner pin or you use the grid warp inside of the insert module. With the insert module, you can also render with motion blur, which is super handy. So does anybody have any questions about this workflow, or anybody have any anecdotes of any problems that they've had? And I can try to answer them. Let me see. Over in the chat. It might take a second for people to type in. While that's going, let's go ahead and show you what this ended up looking like. And we'll hit play. So this is what we ended up with as a test, with the face rendering right back over the top. Keep in mind when you're tracking, there are always going to be situations where you're going to have to do holdout mats or where you're going to have to do some hand animation. Cajun Catastrophe, I keep wanting to say catastrophe, has a question. They say the new puppet that I made tracked fantastic, as I said earlier. However, when I tried a stop motion example, the tracking does not work well at all. Okay. Now, I want to further clarify. When you're doing your stop motion test, is that on twos? So it's going 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. I believe we talked about that. If it is, then what you probably want to do is go back in, as I mentioned earlier in this, and I'll show you. Let's open Mocha. Whenever you want to open. Okay, perfect. Okay, so to further troubleshoot that, if it's not working right, come right over here into your search area and turn auto off and make this like 800 by 600. And what you're going to do is you're going to increase the search area. Yeah, shot on twos. Okay, perfect. So what it's doing is it's having trouble with the amount of change between that motion. Because when you did your test, you filmed it and your hand is holding it and you're doing this sort of, number, which is great. But the incremental motion has a lot of tweening between it. you don't have a lot of tweening in your other motion. And hopefully you haven't done anything like baked motion blur into it or baked retiming into it, because that'll further mess everything up. Because Mocha is looking for a pattern of pixels, and anything that adulterates those pixels, things like retiming, things like forcing motion blur, will mess up how the tracker is reading those pixels, because then the computer is inventing pixels between frames. Okay, and that can cause real problems. Now you can also increase your angle that you're looking for, and you can increase your zoom. So especially if you're doing, like the old school internet memes where you have like a super rack focus, you need to go ahead and increase that zoom percentage as well. So if it's, from one frame to the next frame, the increase is like 40%, you want to jump this number up to 40 or 50%. Okay, because then it'll look in that range to try to find the change in pixels. Okay, so you're also saying there's no motion blur or Twixtor. That's good. I recommend that you add those things at the end, because obviously any motion blur that you add to your shot is always going to add a little extra something that makes your work look more realistic. And I highly recommend that you do that. But afterwards, very end of the pipeline. Same for retiming, very end of the pipeline. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, if I were to retrack this, it would be a little bit slower. So if I come over to my track tab and I hit track forwards, do notice that it is a little slower. Now, one more thing that I want to point out to you, if you are having trouble with your track, if you come over here, especially if you've just recently updated your computer, come over to File and Preferences. Okay, under your GPU tab will be Use GPU Processing. If you have it on automatic, that can sometimes be a problem. So for instance, I always want to have Quadro RTX selected, but I recently updated my computer, so it's gone back to automatic. Okay, so I'll have to fix that, save and reclose. I don't want to use my Intel, I want to use my Quadro. Okay, we don't want to allow unsupported GPUs. Okay, but make sure if you're using GPU processing that your GPU is supported. You can find that on our website. If you go to Mocha and you go to tech specs, or if you just want to type in GPUs into our search on our website, you can find whether or not your GPU is supported. Because we started using GPU tracking to try to increase the speed times of tracks, because nobody wants to wait on tracks. But not everybody's GPU is supported. So if you turn this off and you hit OK, you'll have to save and close, and you'll have to restart AE. Okay. Now, when you are doing that, you're going to have to restart the whole host and everything. Okay. And then once you restart, your tracking will have switched to CPU. So if you ever find that you're tracking something and the shape is either staying in the screen or jumping off screen, you probably don't have a supported GPU and you need to move to CPU tracking. So I hope that helps. All right. Miguel says that they wish it would be easier to pop between computers with a license. And I agree with you to an extent, although it should be pretty easy. So let's go to our GPU preferences really quick, and let's turn those back on. Turn them back on, please. Back to automatic. Okay. Save and close. Okay. Over here, you should be able to reset your license. So all you have to do, you can either download the app manager. Excuse me. That's not what I wanted to do. You should be able to go over here to your license. And in your license, you should be able to deactivate and reactivate. All right. So you always forget to deactivate before you move. Okay. Well, but you can deactivate your license using another computer's web browser. So you can always use that option. But yeah, I understand. It would be easier if you could do it a little bit more automated, but you still can use a browser as long as you have your key. And you always have access to your key if your keys are hooked up and you have a Boris FX account on borisfx.com. So make sure, let me just cut here for a second. Okay, so make sure if you are a Boris FX user that you have an account on our website, because then you have access to all of your license keys and you can see them at all times. So if you forget to deactivate, you can still manually deactivate using a browser and you have access to your keys. So hopefully that helps moving forward. Does anybody else have any questions? Let's see. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I can spend that troubleshooting something that that's bothering somebody. If you have an issue that you stumble over a lot, I'm happy to talk about that. And Miguel, yes, you can release every 30 days. If you have a need where you got to switch a little bit more often for whatever reason, I would just call our support team and see what they can do to help you. You can always reach us right on our contact form, either on borisfx.com, or you can call the number there during business hours. And our business hours are East Coast time, Monday through Friday. Monday through Friday. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about some other stuff. Let's see, what do I have on here that's interesting? Let's talk about, let's see. We already talked about Adjust Track. But let's talk about Adjust Track in a little bit more depth. Okay. So we've got this shot. Let's talk about a real quick and easy replacement. Well, I say quick and easy, but it's not super easy. Okay, so this shot. What we've got going on here is a card that's moving into place, and you can see it has absolutely no tracking data. Oof. Okay. That means there's no pattern of pixels here to track. All right. So because of that, let's talk about how to fix this. Let's go over to Mocha Pro. Now here's the thing. This shot, I'm actually glad that it doesn't have tracking markers on it, because then I have to clean that. Okay. But this is kind of challenging. So let's go ahead and hit Launch Mocha. And let's let Mocha launch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about cheating the planar track. Okay. So let's zoom in here. Let's find a good frame to start tracking from. Now, I like this frame, but let's wait till the finger's completely out of frame. Okay. And now let's draw a quick little square right around our surface. Well, our card. It's not really a surface. Okay, and I can tell that the edges are, let's zoom in. Okay, let's do this. Let's take our light and make it darker. Okay. And yeah, let's zoom in. Perfect. Okay, so now I can see those edges. And let's go back up to 1. Okay, so you see how I just changed the lighting so that I could see? Oh, ha ha ha. I talked about this thing for a while without cutting back to my screen. Very good. Let's start over. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry, guys. One man banding it over here, and I just spaced it. So thank you for saying that. All right. Scrubbing back and forth. All right, so let's make a shape right around the screen. We want to replace this card. I can't believe that I was just talking to y'all without showing my screen. Okay, here we are. Let's find. Okay, perfect. All right. Let's scoot over here. There we go. Well, we're going to take another solid shape tool and we're going to draw it right around our card. Okay, so the trick that I was trying to show you guys is that over here, we have this brightness adjustment. And I can take this brightness down so that I can see where the corners of this card are, because it's white on white. And that's really difficult. But if I take the darkness down, I can see there's a little bit of an edge there. Okay, Now, because of that, let's come over here. I want to track a little bit outside of this card, okay? Because this basically becomes my tracking markers, okay? Now let's jump this back up to 1, okay? The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a circle and draw it right around this hand, okay? For the hand, we're going to track translation only, okay? We're going to call this hand track, hold out, okay? And here we're going to call this card track, okay? We're going to track the card all the way down to perspective, but the hand, only translation, okay? Because I don't really care about anything else but the translation because this is a garbage mat, okay? So now let's hit track backwards. We're going to track both of these at the same time. And because the hand is over the card, let me just show you something real quick. Let's take our matte colors and change them to blue here. Okay. So if I go to my card track here and let's turn our matte on, you can see as I'm tracking, let's turn my surface tool on so I can see. You can see that as I'm tracking, we're not tracking anywhere where these fingers are going to be until they're grabbed on. And then I don't care. Oh, good. So Cajun Catastrophe says that they just tried expanding the search area on the actual stop motion footage they were using, and the tracking is working much better. Okay, good. That's expected, right? Because of the motion range change. Wonderful. I'm glad that worked for you. Okay, so now we're going to stop this track, and I'm going to take my hand, and I'm just going to animate the shape over here, and I'm going to stop tracking that hand. Actually, let's just go ahead and trim the layer. I'm going to trim the layer all the way to there. All right. Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to keep tracking backwards. Okay, because now we've got that thumb in view, and the thumb isn't moving, so we're just going to go ahead and keep tracking backwards with perspective. The other cool thing we can do is we can take our surface tool and let's adjust this to all 4 corners of my little card. Okay, and again, we're just going to do that really quick. And one cool thing to note, let's turn my mats off here so you can see, is when we are adjusting a surface corner that we can't see the corner for, we can always just extrapolate by using this corner and the bottom corner and then looking at the lines on the side. Yay, geometry. Okay, so now let's keep tracking backwards. Let's zoom out a little bit. Keep tracking backwards, just like that. And so what this is going to do is Mocha's going to follow this right off screen. But you notice we're having a little bit of trouble hanging on, okay? And it's because it can't tell the bottom apart from what else is happening, okay? So now what we can do is we can stop this and we can move our tracking shape, excuse me. I wanted to move my tracking shape up, not my surface tool, but whatever. Let's move that up. Okay. And then let's keep tracking backwards. And so what we're going to do is for that problem area, we're going to use adjust track. We could also try changing parameters. So we could make the parameters down to just translation only, or we could change the parameters to translation, scale, and rotation. There's many different ways that we can try to get around this. I'm going to get around it with adjust track. Because even if I tried to just use translation, scale, and rotation only, I'd still end up having to use adjust track. Hope that makes sense. All right, we got 10 more minutes left. I think that's enough time to do this project. Okay, now we want to track forwards. So let's let it track. Track. Actually, let's go ahead and take our surface tool off here. And I think, yeah, it doesn't move anymore past that. Okay, so what we can do We can just come over here and let's switch to manual track only. Let's do like one more keyframe. And then let's make a keyframe here at the end. Let's see, track forwards. Okay, so now we've got a track for that whole range. Okay, so let's switch back to large motion. So for those of you that don't know what I was doing, all of this red is still untracked, okay? But I made 2 manual keyframes at the beginning of the stop and the end of the stop. And that's only because I want to have a keyframe range so that I can still use my insert. But I don't want to just sit through tracking a blank area of no motion. So you can also do that to get around occlusions, all kinds of stuff that you can use manual track for, okay? Now, let's dive in here and let's start to see where this starts to go off. Okay, so let's take our surface tool, okay? And let's make sure our surface tool is perfectly aligned to our card, just like this. Okay, and it's really nice to use adjust track on a card or anything square because it's always pretty obvious where the correction points are. Even if there's like a thumb over a corner, like I said, you can always use those edges. Okay, so let's go back to adjust track and let's do a translation, scale, shear, and perspective, set points, correction. All right, we want to set our reference frame as this frame, okay? And now we want to look for the bad frames right where stuff starts to happen. So what's my last good frame is right here. So I can add a keyframe right here, and now we've just got a nice set of keyframes between these 2 areas. So now I can hand correct this. So let's move in and zoom. And let's correct this just like this. Let's take our surface. Let's take our transform tool and turn that off. There we go. All right, so that's a correction. And now let's do another correction. And let's look for where it's the most off. So right here, correct and correct. And it should animate. Yep, it animates right between. All right, so here's another good frame. Let's make a keyframe. Okay, and now let's look for where it's off again. Right here. All right, and again, one more correction, just like that. All right. And again, let's come over here and make our corrections. And the reason we're having to correct this bottom is because there wasn't enough texture for Mocha to track. So what we're doing is we're cheating. We're just doing a 4-corner correction on top of our track, just like that. So now we end up with this beautiful track. All right, so what can we do with this? We can do that same thing where we can go to our track tab and we can say, hey, export our tracking data, and we can do a power pen, or we can do an insert. So let's save this and close it. Okay, and then let's save our After Effects file because we are not masochists. And let's go to Module Renders, and let's select our insert layer as our thank you. Okay, and let's say, hey, render insert composite. And let's launch Mocha. Inside of Mocha, I'm going to make sure that it is aligned where I want. Let's go ahead and hit start. Perfect. So here's my card track. Insert clip, insert layer. And yeah, I don't like the way that looks. That's way too stretched. Okay. So again, because we're using the insert module, what you see is what you get. So let's take thank you and move it right here. Okay. And let's go to our insert module. Let's actually make this multiplied. So let's go to multiply. So now it's the same color as the card. We can even take the multiply down to like 90 so it matches the lighting a little better, maybe even there. Okay, and we can turn motion blur on. And so now we're going to hit save and close. Okay, and right inside of After Effects, I have a lovely comp that's been tracked. Even though there's no tracking markers on this card, we adjust tracked to make sure that we got around the wobble, okay, and the lack of a bottom edge. And we rendered with multiply so that we don't have to worry about any masks, okay? And then we also added motion blur so that we don't have to worry about this matching the motion blur of the scene or not. It's all automatically generated for us. So that's a really quick and dirty way to hand track something that, you know, Mocha mostly tracked, but you didn't necessarily have all the data you needed. So that's why adjust track is important. And it also highlighted the need to use manual track. And what's cool about manual track is obviously you can create keyframes that tween between one another that are actually part of the track. So you don't necessarily have to sit through an area where the track is sitting still. And that way you don't introduce any artifacts either. So if you had maybe tracked an object that was sitting perfectly still, the tracker might have wobbled a little bit, because what the tracker does is the tracker looks at frame 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, okay? And then it tries to look at that range over time and correct. But because it's looking over time, drift can be introduced. So when something's perfectly still, you might want to keyframe around that. I hope that answered anybody's questions. If anybody had any questions about manual track or adjust track. All right, guys. Well, we are nearing the end of this. I hope that you enjoyed office hours. We went over basically how to think about stop motion puppets and adding animated faces to them. We talked a little bit about adjust track and manual track in both of those instances and using the insert module. And yes, this live stream will be available just as soon as it's over. It'll be in our channel on Boris FX Learn, and you can go in and you can watch it again and again until you get the hang of what we were doing. If you ever want to follow along, my footage lately has been off of a website called Pexels. So you can find this very same shot on Pexels, and you can use this very same technique to try to copy what I just did. Now, obviously, I am not sharing Cajun Catastrophe's, Craft Catastrophe's test footage, but that's okay. You can run your own tests for your own stop motion models, and you can see how that works. Remember, though, whenever you're working with stop motion, increase your search area. All right, guys. I'm so glad that you came and sat in on my office hours. And if you have any footage that you're having trouble with, just go ahead and email me. I'm the easiest person in the world to find. You can either submit them via our cases on borisfx.com, or you can email me directly at maryp@borisfx.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Also, if there is footage that you want me to troubleshoot live, I'd love to have it. All right, guys, thanks so much for coming. This has been Office Hours with Boris FX and Mary Poplin. I really appreciate you coming by and being part of this.